Hello everybody, this is Gynarchy Awakening back for another video. In light of recent events, I wanted to forward a discussion type, I wanted to publish and upload a discussion type video as it relates to our community. I have actually been wanting to create this particular topic for a long time, but I didn't really know when or where it was appropriate, and also there were times when it simply slipped my mind. But when somebody in the Gynarchy community posted about like fighting back against certain groups, the topic gained a fresh, it refreshed my memory. And I thought before I get back to cannonball crushing, I would take some time to talk about it and to ask some questions to the people in the Gynarchy community. The first question, and it's the title of the video, is narrative brains and fabric brains. What should their roles, what role do they have in the Gynarchy community? What is their purpose? And to really go further, I do want to finish this up more quickly because I did this video beforehand and I reviewed it and I found it to be lacking and I made some critical errors, so I had to refilm it. But essentially what a fabric brain is it's kind of like this. Everything is determined by your focus. So a fabric brain will think about the consequence of one action. So if you think about the one single action being like this, the fabric brain is focused on what that touch is doing to the entire paper. That, and there are times when, and it's not necessarily about who they side with or who they don't side with, it's how they're focusing and it's how they're processing information in their personal reality. They have a particular affinity and their concentration is largely on the different effects from the cause. They are fascinated with process. Now, when you juxtapose that with what a narrative brain is, forget the fabric brain, but what is the narrative brain? And what does that do? The narrative brain will do something like this. They'll take a look at the paper and they'll go, okay. They'll do stuff like this. It's the best way to explain it visually. So they'll draw a line at the center and say, this is my side and this is your side. And then they'll rip up the paper like this. And this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? First it started with one side. They tried to do that in the other, but what ends up happening with narrative brains is because they are so concentrated on conflict, they end up doing this to the fabric until it's completely torn apart. And then you have nothing but pieces. Now, based on what I have studied about in particular from history classes, and also looking into our survival as a species from the past, I do understand how they developed. There are certain situations where it may be more appropriate to have a narrative brain versus a fabric brain. The narrative brain is good for conflict, any kind of interpersonal violence. That's going to be more to the benefit and survival of that person, because if you're processing too much information about everything all around you, that can distract you from the moment. And on the other hand, though, there are many circumstances that a narrative brain naturally comes across that it's not suited for. That type of mind and brain does not work well in human relations. In fact, narrative brains have repeatedly caused problems for communities, for governments, for all of human society. We have seen the dangerous consequences of what happens when these individuals are elected to office or sworn in as kings or queens or whatever, these individuals have always been dangerous when they have power over these institutions, primarily because they don't always consider the consequences of their actions. One of my first exposures to a narrative brain was actually my own family. It happened twice. I will never, I forgot some of the context, but I'll never forget the exact moments when it broke out. When I saw the first altercation between two male family members, like when I was watching them, I got the impression that it was like nothing else existed. It was just him and the other guy. They were so focused on each other, they weren't even paying attention to the environment. If they started moving around, they could have accidentally hurt me or an animal or the property, but they weren't thinking about those things. It was just put them up. And that right there is a problem. And I saw it again later when one of my family members assaulted the other with I think it was a metal can. He slammed it down on the knee of another family member and caused him to bleed. I believe I intervened in that fight in an attempt to de-escalate a potentially dangerous altercation from breaking out. Obviously they're still alive, so I think I was successful there. And these are just two instances of, so if you want to think about what they're like and what they do, they are good for when you need to take action immediately, when you need to have a quicker response time. Those brains are really good in life or death situations and conflict-ridden scenarios or long-term battles or wars, but they don't necessarily work very well in other areas of life. And that does lead me to a couple of questions, because I do believe that the individual, the male, and I'm not saying that I'm any better or worse. I used to have a very toxic narrative brain, and I have been attempting to transition to a fabric brain, and this transition has been going on for literally over a decade. I have tried my best to consider the consequences of my actions. I have fallen short in several instances. Sometimes I don't consider the effects that my tone can have on other people when I raise it. When I get, to me, I'm just getting annoyed, but to other people in the past, they've noted that you seem like you're angry and it's frightening to me. And I do, to this day, struggle with containing my aggression that I developed when I was with my male family members. That was sort of imparted on to me by them because I learned from them how to engage and interact with people, and it wasn't healthy. And I don't believe that you have to always be a narrative brain in every situation, and you don't always have to be a fabric brain for the same reason. In the same circumstance. And yet what is fascinating is people often behave with only one type of mentality in almost every aspect of their life, which is, I don't know if that's because of the society, I don't know if that's because of socialization or if it's their genetics. I'm not entirely sure why that's happening. But I see that occurring, I saw that occurring in my family, and I've seen that in the behavior of others. And it made me think, as a Gynarchy community, it made me consider two questions that I'd like to pose to the members of the Gynarchy community. The first is, how can narrative brains be of use to our community? What can their possible role be in a way that is not going to damage and harm others? Because when taken to the extreme, this type of brain does this. It tears a fabric apart. Now, on the other hand, I realize that if you take a fabric brain to the extreme, you can have somebody who's entirely apathetic and there's no action. So I realize and I recognize the merits that both types of brains can bring, but I do have concerns about that type. Because that's one of the reasons why I want women as leaders, is because I believe more women tend to have what are called fabric brains, and that those are necessary for the brainstorming, development, and implementation of policy for communities and governments. I do feel that that they have that on lockdown, that that's simply something they're better at as a group. And I think that those types of brains would benefit society. Yet, narrative brains are not simply going to go away. I do feel like my personal instinct on this is that I think it is, to some extent, an artificially constructed mindset. Like, I believe that you can work your way out of the most toxic narrative brains, and you can become more disciplined and reasonable over time. And by the way, I'm by no way suggesting that the individual who posted it is the worst type. The worst types are the male members of my family. It's just no contest. They are extremely dangerous. Anything can really, like, sometimes I've had to be careful about my words, because there are certain things that can just set them off and explode them like volcanoes. So there is that. So if we can, is there a way, without altering them, without necessarily changing them, can they be put to some kind of positive use? Can the narrative brain be nurtured and guided to do positive things? And if it cannot be nurtured and guided in those ways, how can we go about aiding and assisting people with narrative brains into transitioning more over to using fabric brains, if not entirely, at least in other scenarios where it may not be appropriate to carry that mindset or that drawback? At least that's how I see it. I think those are all the questions that I have. I can't think of any others at the moment. Please take care, everybody. Well wishes, and I got to get back to work. So peace out for now. Okay.